The following has been recorded at Cairn University. Any reproduction of this recording without the express permission of the university is prohibited.
Good morning, and this beautiful spring morning. And I'm so grateful for this conversation that we can have at Cairn University, connecting and integrating so many issues that divide the world today. Wendell Berry said, practice resurrection. And in our post-Easter walk, in our journey, we need to be thinking about that. Now, an artist's task is particularly attuned to this resurrection reality. Creative process opens up avenues of experience tied, I think, directly to the resurrection, but most artists are not cognizant of this. But Bruce and I, as we worked, and Jeremy and others that we've journeyed with, art is a signpost of this greater reality with a capital R, the kind of reality that is depicted so well in this biblical narrative of creation and the fall, the darkness that ensues, and the consummation to come. All of these signposts, all of these things are reflected and should be reflected in our arts, and it is Christians living in faith to this biblical reality that should be the first to take advantage, enjoy the offerings of the arts, because artists know that everything is a miracle. And they are like the shepherds in Bethlehem who noticed the stars, noticed the signs all around them. To them, the miraculous day of Christmas morning is something that all nature is pointing to. And Christians' life ought to be miraculous. Your life should be something that someone looks at, and total strangers and maybe enemies will say, I can't explain that life. And art helps us to journey into that place. There are two ways, I think, that art can help us to practice resurrection. One, art allows the deeper experience of darkness, smaller death, or perhaps dealing with death directly, and the particular vulnerability to explore the darker reality of our lives, of our beings. And that can be difficult. It can be challenging, it can be confusing. But T.S. Eliot does this so well, and I'm going to journey with you this morning into his poem for Quartet. Second, the arts can recover and restore from that experience of darkness. Meaning and significance and beauty can come out of that. What Dante called journey into the darker woods generates into something new, creating a new vista of experience. Last time I spoke here, I spoke on John 11 and about Mary and the tears of Christ. And I'm going to go back there, though we are in post-Easter now. I'm going to go back there to talk about Lazarus in connection with these two things that arts can bring, because the scant two really mentions of Lazarus in Scripture in John 11 and John 12, I think is really helpful to understand why in practicing resurrection mindset, we can look to the temporary resurrection of Lazarus as something that humans can connect with, as we wrestle perhaps with this miracle of Easter, this creation of the new, this ordinary language being transformed into the miraculous. And the miraculous then can become our ordinary language as Christians. So let's look at the story of Lazarus in John 11 and John 12. Now, in the Four Holy Gospels book that I had the privilege of illuminating, on John 11 and John 12, it goes over 2 pages here. And I have this image, and I painted, imagining what Lazarus might have heard when he heard the voice of Jesus. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but I mean, this guy was dead, right? So he's 3 days in the tomb, his years are rotting away. I mean, what did he hear when Jesus called him out of the tomb? And so this abstract imagery is really almost like sound waves, music filled with gold and vermilion, which is for me a symbol of Christ's blood, sanctifying everything that we hear. And so those are things that artists can wrestle with and perhaps even depict. How do we practice resurrection? Learning from Lazarus. And this journey toward darkness, let me start with that. There's no one like Lazarus to help us with that, right? Because all we know is that he became ill, and his sisters sent for Jesus, expecting him to come, of course, in time. And Jesus intentionally does not. He tells his disciples, it says in John 11, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment, an important detail I'll come back to later, and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, this is what he said. This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. The scriptures note that Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus, but he delays his coming. He does not come to heal. He is not the miracle worker, at least not yet. So the sisters are perplexed, and disciples are perplexed, and the conversation, if you read that passage, reveals how perplexed they were and confused. And Mary, I think, last time I spoke here, I talked to you about Mary. I introduced her as the quintessential artist. She's intuitive, she's emotive, she's able to experience and express things that go much deeper than most of us. And I think Mary is actually angry at Jesus because she does not come to meet Jesus halfway as does Martha. Martha comes and wants an explanation, but Mary weeps. And here in this place, in Bethany, you see a picture of Jesus who is not just here to solve our problems. He's not just here to save us. Here in Bethany, you see a picture of God who weeps. I wonder, even in these post-Easter days, we just celebrated Easter, you might still be in a place of darkness. Even though you just celebrated Christ's secure and permanent resurrection for you, you might still be wondering why God has arrived to your Bethany late. wondering why your prayers are not answered. Maybe you feel like God is resisting your prayers and the darkness has not lifted. April is the cruelest month, T.S. Eliot noted in The Wasteland. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dulled roots with spring rain. Why is April cruel to a poet? Well, to a poet who's seen the front lines, who's been traumatized in the war by being an air warden, hearing those echoes of bombs going off and knowing that people have not returned to their homes. And yet nature goes on, doesn't it? Every spring, beauty comes back. Lilacs, tulips. And to those who are grieving, that feels cruel. Like God has left them, forgotten about them. That the world continues without the pause, without the weeping that you feel inside. So when we look at John 11, in our post-Easter journey, we can find Jesus who is weeping with you. And he doesn't explain why he is coming late to you, but he does waste his time weeping with you. Jesus' tears are with you this morning behind maybe your own anger against injustice or against corruption, against death. Then it's after that Jesus does go to the tomb. He calls Lazarus. When we experience darkness, this reality of death, isn't it true that we don't hear things well? We have ears to hear, but we think God is silent. We wait for God, but we cannot sense His presence. But you and I can, with Lazarus, journey into that darkness, into the abyss directly. I was trapped in an underground, in a subway on 9/11. My family lived 3 blocks away. My children went to public schools 2 blocks away from the towers. I was trapped underground in a subway trying to get back home. I was at an artist prayer meeting that morning. My wife was standing at the schoolyard of PS 234. And when she saw the plane go over her head, she knew exactly it wasn't an accident. So I didn't know what happened for about 2 hours because the train backtracked underground and they didn't tell us what was happening. I'm glad they didn't. 2 miles north on 14th Street, I was let out and immediately I faced this hospital, St. Vincent's Hospital, with doctors and nurses standing by silently, awaiting for the wounded. But as you may, most of you, I don't know if you have experienced 9/11. So I used to say as you remember, but I don't know if you remember that. But if you read about it, you know that these triage sections were rarely used because the life and death line was so clear that morning. So I came out and I only could see the smoke. No more towers. I had no idea what happened. My family was spared that morning. I thank God for these teachers, public school teachers who trained throughout the summer for events such as this. They were very well trained, in some cases, than the police. My kids were evacuated. Ironically, I had to go back 2 blocks north again to 14th Street area where my children were evacuated. And to this day, I go through darkness, struggling to find my stability from that day. We were displaced. We couldn't go back home. So my pastor, who lived in Brooklyn, took us in, all of us, 5 people. And I used to take the subway from Brooklyn to Canal Street, below Canal Street, where my studio was, which is about 10 blocks north of the towers. And I remember being so disoriented that I didn't know which way I was going. I didn't remember if I was going home or if I was going to the studio. But I carried around my Bible and T.S. Eliot. And I used to read both. But with Eliot's 4 Quartets, I had to read it out loud. And that's what Bruce will tell you if he would tell you about the poem. He says, read this poem out loud. It's a difficult poem, but you need to hear the sound. Eliot was influenced by Beethoven. So it is a composed poem responding to Beethoven. So I remember reading 4 Quartets out loud in the subway of New York City. And apparently that's not too unusual in New York City. No one minded me for doing that. So imagine with me reading this out loud in the subway of New York City after 9/11. This is from East Coker, the second of the poems of 4 Quartets, and it is principally the passage that I focused on in painting these images. Oh, dark, 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 they all go into the dark. The vacant interstellar spaces, the vacant into the vacant. The captains, merchant, bankers, eminent men of letters, the generous patrons of art, the statesmen and the rulers, distinguished civil servants, chairmen of many committees, industrial lords and petty contractors, they all go into the dark. And dark the sun and moon, and the almanac de Gotha, and the Stock Exchange Gazette, the directory of directors. And cold the sense and lost the motive of action, and we all go with them into the silent funeral. Nobody's funeral, for there is no one to bury. I said to my soul, be still, and let the dark come upon you, which shall be the darkness of God, as in a theater. The lights are extinguished. The scene is to be changed with the hollow rumble of wings, with a movement of darkness on darkness. And we know that the hills and the trees and the distant panorama and the bold, imposing facade are all being rolled away. Or as when an underground train in a tube stops too long between stations. And the conversation rises and slowly fades into silence. And you see behind every face the mental emptiness deepen, leaving only the growing terror of nothing to think about. Or when under ether, the mind is conscious, but conscious of nothing. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. For hope would be the hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing, whisper of running streams and winter lightning. The wild thyme unseen and the wild strawberry, the laughter in the garden, echo the ecstasy not lost but requiring, pointing to the agony of death and birth. Recently, I was getting ready to prepare for Quartets. I reread these passages and I thought, my goodness, this is really depressing. This is like the most depressing thing I ever read. But I remember reading this out loud in the subways of New York City, being comforted. Why did I find it so comforting? They spoke to me. A human voice spoke to me. This was the Lazarus voice coming through T.S. Eliot. This was Lazarus speaking through this ground zero reality of my backyard. And the poet's task is to tune that into a form that we can all understand and feel and experience, to describe this condition of darkness honestly. And that is a difficult task. It's not for everyone. It's a calling. Eliot, as a new convert to Anglicanism, knew also about the hope of Easter. His poetic intuition also moves deeply, therefore, into not just Good Friday, but Holy Saturday, the darkest day of the year for us. The darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. What he speaks of here is a contrition of our whole being, and admitting even that even though we talk about this hope, love, and faith, we don't really know fully what that means. We can speak of this greater hope, but we can still fail to live in that hope. We can desire to love, but what we end up really is to wait for that love to come to us. And oftentimes, worse yet, we end up seeking counterfeit love. See, this art of waiting is so important for us. I think that's one of the critical ways that artists can provide a platform for a community like this to talk about the reality of the resurrection, what Lazarus heard in his darkness, though, was not a voice of a mere mortal trying to speak of love and hope. What called Lazarus out was a voice of Jesus speaking through the Father. And then this life returned in a dead, cruel land. So secondly, when we look at Lazarus, we see that this short passage in John 12, Lazarus is seen reclining at the table. I love this. Imagine yourself as Lazarus. The most wanted sign is out on your life because you're causing so many people to come to believe in Jesus. The authorities want to arrest him and kill him. But Lazarus is seen reclining at the table. This is what I imagine him thinking. I was dead. I died. And Jesus raised me. I don't care what they can do to me. I mean, what more can they do to me? I have nothing to fear. All I know is I have to hang around with this guy. And I'm going to be okay. Do you know that today, spiritually and even historically, you and I have more than Lazarus in this confidence, this relaxed repose, this faith? Do you know that we have more information than Lazarus did? At that point in John 12, when he is seen reclining at the table? We were dead in sin too. And Christ called us and raised us. We should be just like Lazarus. Our culture should be permeated with people who is just as relaxed, who is confident, who is faithful, knowing that all we have to do is to follow Jesus. You will walk a different path that way. N.T. Wright wrote a book called Surprised by Hope. I want to close with this. He talks about God's kingdom coming in this resurrection reality. This is a way to practice resurrection, to think about heaven in a different way. He calls it life after death. And he says that, we think of heaven as something that happens after death, and that's not incorrect. But that's not where the Bible ends. It is the reconciled whole in this merging of heaven and earth. It's not that we go to heaven. Heaven comes to us and brings in this seed of the resurrection reality into our lives right now. And Wright talks about two ways that you can tap into this: mercy and beauty. Two paths that you can walk on today. If you practice mercy, if you create beauty, you are tapping into this integrated reality somehow. I don't understand fully what happens there. To bring in this reality, what Wright calls heaven, is a place where God's purposes for the future are stored up. It isn't where they're meant to stay. So one would need to go to heaven to enjoy them. It is where they are kept safe against the day when they will become a reality on earth. If you practice mercy, create beauty, you are part of that vessel to bring heaven to become reality on earth. Let me quote this and end. You are not oiling the wheels. This is N.T. Wright. You're not oiling the wheels of a machine that is about to roll over a cliff. You're not restoring a great painting that is shortly going to be thrown into the fire. You are not planting roses in a garden that's about to be dug up for a building site. You are, strangely though it seems, almost as hard to believe as the resurrection itself, accomplishing something that will become in due course part of God's new world. Let me pray. Father, send us forth this day to practice resurrection. Allow us to experience your mercy and your beauty for us first. And then help us, Lord, in our small ways, in our weak ways, in our humble ways, to be able to bring that into the world so that you can usher in this new kingdom, even on this campus of Cairn University. Thank you for these students. Thank you for President Williams and all the professors who labor to make that happen. In Jesus' name, amen.